Imagine waking up in the city of Sumy, walking outside, and finding the streets just littered with banknotes dropped from the sky.
Right.
Drones humming overhead, but instead of explosives, they're delivering counterfeit currency.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's a totally calculated attempt to trigger a localized bank run, crash the local markets, and just weaponize civilian panic. We're looking at a conflict that is rapidly shifting far beyond traditional trenches into deep psychological and economic warfare.
Absolutely.
Good morning and welcome to your deep dive into current events. Today is May 11th, 2026.
Thanks for having me.
We are turning our focus today to the ongoing situation in Europe, specifically the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I want to note that this deep dive is sponsored by ProWave AI and is generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application.
Right, which is a fantastic tool.
It really is. The official title of today's briefing is Ukraine War Briefing. Russia warns Kyiv as long-range attacks expand.
Catchy title.
Very to the point. And I want to briefly explain to you listening that the Stylo News application you are hearing today is actually the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which is huge, right? Because that's an enterprise-grade tool.
Exactly. This gives you unique access to a tool originally designed for enterprise operations. I mean, this is the exact same intelligence synthesis engine supporting government, military, and business decision makers globally.
And now it's just right there on your phone.
Yeah, right on your phone. So today, our mission is to cover the primary patterns of events over the past 2 weeks without bias. We will analyze the recent diplomatic efforts, examine the tactical battlefield, and look at the international ripple effects.
And we can't forget the cyber warfare front, too.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, and we'll unpack social media sentiment to give you a clear, factual picture of the current state of affairs.
Sounds like a solid roadmap.
Let's start with diplomacy, or what looked like diplomacy.
Yeah.
The patterns emerging over the last 14 days represent a pretty significant evolution, don't they?
They do. I mean, we're seeing both sides basically test the absolute limits of their long-range capabilities while simultaneously, preparing their domestic populations for a much longer standoff.
But those preparations were heavily disguised as diplomacy in early May. We saw this massive flurry of high-level discussions about a potential ceasefire.
Right. Heavily involving U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Right. And Russia formally proposed a unilateral ceasefire specifically for May 8th and 9th. But then Ukraine countered with an earlier proposal for May 5th and 6th and outright rejected the Russian dates.
Yeah, it was back and forth.
So why even propose a ceasefire at all if both sides know the other's going to reject the specific dates?
Well, because in this phase of the conflict, a ceasefire proposal isn't really about peace. It's a weapon of coercive diplomacy.
Okay, coercive how?
It's about controlling the narrative, right?
Well,
the dates definitely weren't arbitrary. Russia's proposed dates coincided directly with their Victory Day celebration.
oh, of course, May 9th.
Exactly. So a pause in fighting on those specific days would allow Moscow to hold its scaled-back military parades without the embarrassment of Ukrainian drones appearing in the airspace above Red Square.
I see. So it's essentially operational security under the guise of peacemaking.
Precisely. It's a PR move.
Which explains Ukraine's counterproposal then.
Yeah.
By offering May 5th and 6th, Ukraine is basically calling the bluff.
Yes, exactly. They signal a willingness to pause, but on dates that do not offer Russia that specific domestic public relations victory.
And it goes beyond just PR, right? There are actual tactical implications on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. Zelensky's administration recognizes that a poorly negotiated pause heavily favors the occupying force. I mean, when artillery stops firing, engineering units start pouring concrete.
And that makes total sense. They dig in.
Right. A ceasefire without concrete security guarantees and, mechanisms for accountability simply allows Russian forces to reinforce supply lines and rotate exhausted frontline troops.
So the rejection was basically a refusal to allow the front to freeze into a permanent border.
Exactly. It's a very calculated refusal.
But the rhetoric from those failed negotiations immediately translated into physical escalation. The moment those proposed ceasefires were supposed to take effect, intelligence reports indicate Russia just launched massive attacks.
Massive, massed drone and guided bomb attacks across the Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Sumy regions.
And Ukraine responded with mirror military strikes.
Yeah. The Russian offensive campaign right now is relying heavily on this specific combination of massed fires, overwhelming drone swarms, and glide bombs.
The glide bombs have been a major talking point recently.
They are the most defining element of their current tactical advantage. We tracked a recent coordinated assault involving over 400 drones targeting Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure within a single window.
400. That's an insane volume.
It is. Roughly half of those were Iranian-designed Shahed models. But again, it's the glide bombs that are doing the real structural damage.
Can you explain the mechanics of these glide bombs?
Yeah.
Why are they proving so devastating compared to, say, traditional artillery or a cruise missile?
Sure. So a glide bomb is essentially a massive retrofitted gravity bomb. We're talking sometimes weighing up to 3 tons.
3 tons. Wow.
Yeah, and they're equipped with pop-out flight surfaces and a basic guidance module. Russian aircraft can release them from high altitudes up to 40 or 50 miles away.
Which means the planes don't even have to cross the border.
Exactly. They remain safely inside Russian airspace, completely out of range of standard Ukrainian surface-to-air missiles.
They're hard to shoot down once they're dropped, right?
Very. Because they have no engine, they emit almost no heat signature for infrared tracking systems to lock onto. They just silently fall toward their targets.
That's terrifying.
And they carry explosive payloads so massive that they can instantly vaporize deep concrete bunkers and entire defensive fortifications.
It's just brute force. And then you combine that kinetic destruction with the counterfeit currency drop we mentioned at the start of the show in Sumy.
Right, the economic warfare angle.
Yeah, you have a dual-pronged assault on both physical infrastructure and societal trust.
Yeah.
I mean, if citizens suddenly suspect the cash in their wallets is worthless.
Local merchants stop accepting physical money.
Exactly. ATMs get rushed, and the local economy just paralyzes itself without a single bullet being fired.
It is textbook psychological warfare. It's designed to compound the terror of the physical bombings.
So how is Ukraine responding? Because they're executing their own reciprocal campaign, and the geography involved is pretty staggering from what I'm reading.
It really is. Ukrainian strikes have now penetrated over 900 kilometers into Russian rear areas.
900 kilometers. That's deep inside Russia.
Very deep. They've struck the Narofominsk logistics area, which is near Moscow. They've hit major oil facilities in Yaroslavl and the Leningrad region, and critical naval infrastructure way down south in Novorossiysk.
That's a massive operational reach. How are they doing it?
They are utilizing long-range drones, and these are increasingly featuring AI-enabled terminal guidance to completely bypass the jammed airspace at the front.
Oh, so they're hitting logistics before they even get close to the battlefield.
Right. By hitting oil refineries and fuel depots hundreds of miles away, they're attempting to choke the diesel supply that Russian tanks and trucks rely on.
Wait. If Ukraine is successfully detonating logistics hubs and fuel supplies 900 kilometers away, why isn't that moving the front line in the Donbass?
That's a great question.
I mean, shouldn't an army starved of fuel and supplies be forced to retreat?
You would logically expect that, but you really have to account for the massive lag time in military supply chains. Plus, Russia's sheer mass.
Right.
Deep strikes hollow out the future fighting capacity of an army. The current frontline combat, however, is fueled by local stockpiles that were moved into position weeks ago.
So what we're seeing on the ground today is a result of logistics from last month.
Precisely. In the Donbass, the war remains largely positional. Russia is still making incremental, localized gains simply by feeding a continuous, overwhelming advantage of manpower into the meat grinder.
So the deep strikes are more of a long-term investment by Ukraine.
Exactly. They do not yield immediate tactical retreats on the ground.
Okay, but the blast radius of these long-range attacks is spilling beyond just the two countries fighting. I wanted to shift to the international impact.
Yeah, the ripple effects are becoming very tangible.
Over the past 2 weeks, a Russian drone breached Romanian airspace near Kyiv, forcing the scrambling of F-16 fighter jets.
Right.
And further north, a drone incursion into Latvia actually resulted in a physical fire at a critical oil storage facility near Rezekne.
Which is a huge escalation, even if it was accidental. These incursions into NATO territory have triggered an immediate response.
What kind of response are we seeing from NATO?
Well, NATO has significantly increased its constant air patrols across the Baltic region. The rhetoric is actively shifting from just observation to active defense integration.
I read that Latvia's Armed Forces Commander, General Kaspars Pudens, is publicly urging the alliance to adopt Ukraine's civilian military defense innovations.
He is. And while the physical borders in Europe are hardening, the geopolitical foundation supporting them is, well, it's fracturing.
You're talking about the U.S. policy shift.
Yes. The U.S. Pentagon has formally excluded funding for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, the USAI, in the 2027 budget.
Okay, unpack the mechanics of the USAI for us, because cutting that specific funding stream seems to send a massive signal.
It does. It's vital to distinguish between the different types of military aid. When you hear about Presidential Drawdown Authority, that is the U.S. sending existing stockpiles of weapons directly from its own warehouses to the battlefield today.
Right, the stuff we already have.
Exactly. The USAI, however, is a procurement mechanism. It is cash authorized by Congress to order new weapons and ammunition from defense contractors.
So this is stuff that will be built and delivered months or even years down the line.
Yes. So by zeroing out the USAI in the 2027 budget, the Trump administration is signaling a permanent pivot. They are cutting the long-term pipeline to reallocate resources toward a looming broader conflict with Iran.
Wow. If the United States is deliberately turning off the tap for future defense procurement, Europe faces a massive security vacuum.
And we are seeing the frantic attempts to fill it right now.
Like what's happening in Germany.
Exactly. Germany is currently executing massive investments into its military logistics infrastructure at the deepwater port of Bremerhaven.
Because traditionally, didn't they rely on the U.S. for that?
For decades, the logistical backbone of moving heavy armor across Europe relied heavily on American management of railheads and ports.
So Germany is racing to build an independent physical capacity to do this themselves.
Right. To receive, stage, and deploy heavy military equipment across the continent without relying on the U.S. military's footprint.
That's a massive shift. And on the diplomatic side, EU Foreign Minister Kaja is issuing severe warnings against any European capitulation to Moscow.
She's demanding the continent stand firm independently. Meanwhile, Russia is actively redrawing its own map of alliances to bypass Western sanctions.
Let's talk about that, the restructuring of the Russian economy.
It's almost complete. Intelligence assessments indicate Russia is now sourcing up to 90% of its sanctioned dual-use technology imports directly from China.
90%. So they've effectively just substituted Western supply chains with Asian ones.
Yes. And to further secure new trade and logistics routes, Moscow is even organizing high-level economic commissions with Afghanistan.
That is wild.
Yeah.
But while the physical supply chains are stretching eastward, Russia's digital supply lines are proving to be intensely vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Let's pivot to the cyber front. On April 16th, Grinex, a highly prominent Russian cryptocurrency exchange based in Moscow, suffered a massive cyber attack.
A massive one, resulting in the theft of over 1 billion rubles directly from user wallets.
And the exchange was forced to completely suspend operations.
Yes. Grinex and the Russian government have formally attributed this attack to Western intelligence agencies.
Right. They framed this event as a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored assault on Russia's financial sovereignty.
Conversely, the global cybersecurity community views this breach as a huge escalation in modern economic warfare. It really highlights how decentralized digital financial infrastructure is now a primary target.
And the intelligence reports surrounding this hack heavily reference advanced AI-driven cybersecurity models, right?
Yeah, specifically GPT 5.4 Cyber and Anthropic's Mytos.
So how does AI actually change the mechanics of a cyber attack like this? Because we aren't just talking about a machine writing better phishing emails here.
No, not at all. We are looking at polymorphic, automated warfare.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, in the past, state-sponsored cyber attacks relied on human analysts finding a vulnerability and manually writing custom code to exploit it. AI models change the scale and the speed.
So it's just much faster.
Insanely faster. These systems can simultaneously probe millions of endpoints across a financial network in seconds.
Wow.
And when they encounter a firewall or a defensive countermeasure, they rewrite their own exploit code on the fly to bypass it.
They adapt in real time.
Exactly. They can penetrate a system, extract 1 billion rubles in crypto, launder it through thousands of decentralized wallets, and erase their tracks before a human security engineer even gets an alert.
That's terrifying for the financial sector.
Financial institutions are incredibly lucrative targets because this level of automation turns their liquidity into a battlefield vulnerability.
Okay, so to gauge how these rapid escalations from AI cyber attacks to Latvian oil fires to drone swarms are actually impacting the public, we analyzed social media sentiment data.
Mostly focusing on trends across X.
Right. And what does the data show?
The sentiment analysis reveals two entirely separate realities.
Shocker.
Right. Users amplifying Russian state-aligned outlets like is.ru and aria.ru maintain a heavily defensive posture.
What are their main talking points?
Their narratives focus intensely on the claimed successes of Russian air defense systems repelling Ukrainian attacks. They frame the presence of any Western or NATO officials in Kyiv as, aggressive provocations justifying military responses.
And they're also hitting on the economic angle, aren't they?
Very much so. A major focal point for this demographic is highlighting Ukraine's economic vulnerabilities, specifically amplifying reports that China is currently demanding a $4.5 billion debt repayment from the Ukrainian government.
So that's the pro-Russian side. But when you cross the digital aisle to examine pro-Ukrainian sentiment, the focus shifts entirely, right?
Entirely. It shifts to the success of the long-range attrition strategy. Users sharing content from outlets like the Kyiv Post and the Moscow Times focus relentlessly on the physical vulnerabilities inside Russia's borders.
Like those deep strikes we talked about.
Exactly. The successful strikes on oil refineries in Yaroslavl are celebrated as critical victories.
And they also emphasize the diplomatic side.
Yes, they heavily emphasize Putin's diplomatic isolation on the global stage. They point out the growing list of international leaders who purposefully boycotted the Victory Day parades in Moscow.
It's fascinating. The information space just functions as a digital extension of the physical trenches.
It really does.
These polarized narratives are not just public opinion. They are the necessary mechanisms both states use to justify ongoing escalation, manage domestic morale, and rally international financial support for a war of attrition.
Exactly. I mean, an attritional war requires immense political capital to sustain. The social media landscape is where that capital is generated and defended.
Okay, based on the synthesis of all these intelligence patterns, we need to map out what you should be watching for in the near future.
Well, first, a comprehensive peace agreement remains highly improbable in the near term.
The concessions required just aren't there.
Right. The fundamental concessions required to satisfy both Kyiv and Moscow simply do not exist right now. Listeners should expect to see unrelenting, localized tactical pressure from Russian forces along the Eastern Front.
Matched by Ukraine's deep strikes.
Yes, matched by a continuation of Ukraine's reciprocal deep strike campaign targeting Russian energy logistics.
What about diplomacy? Anything to watch there?
Any diplomatic breakthroughs will be strictly limited and transactional, likely confined to narrow agreements like prisoner of war exchanges.
But the most critical leading indicator to monitor right now is actually preparation for the winter months, isn't it?
Absolutely. Watch Ukraine's urgent diplomatic pressure to acquire advanced air defense systems, specifically American-made Patriot missile batteries.
Because those take a long time to get operational.
Procurement, delivery, and integration of these complex systems take months. Ukraine is racing to finalize these contracts right now in May to ensure a defensive shield is operational over their power grids and cities before December.
And intelligence suggests Russia is already stockpiling missiles for an unprecedented bombardment of the electrical grid once the temperatures drop.
Yes, they are. It's going to be a very tense few months of preparation.
Well, I am stepping out from behind the anchor desk now to speak directly to you. We want to remind you that the synthesis of global intelligence you heard today was generated entirely by Stylo News.
Which is such an amazing platform.
It is. Stylo News is available right now as a mobile and computer app. It allows you to build and customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs drawn from hundreds of vetted traditional news sources and real-time data from X.
It's an indispensable tool for cutting through the daily noise, to understand the actual mechanisms driving global events.
So subscribe to Stylo News today to get AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com. Thank you for spending your time with us and diving into these complex issues.
It's always a pleasure.
We love producing these briefings for you. Please reach out to request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. But before we sign off, we always want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to explore on your own.
And it's a big one. If the United States permanently shifts its primary strategic focus and procurement budgets toward the Middle East, and Europe is forced to rapidly build an independent military-industrial complex to sustain Ukraine,
Right.
could the ultimate legacy of this war be the complete dismantling of the post-World War II American security umbrella in Europe, regardless of how the conflict in Ukraine actually ends?
Wow. It's like watching a geopolitical seismograph spike off the charts and realizing the tectonic plates beneath us might never settle back into the same shape again. Thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you next time.